Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. With this video, I'll be ranking all 17 mini-adventures from the official 5e campaign book, Candlekeep Mysteries. If you enjoy my videos, consider supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. Shoutouts to Platinum patrons, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Manuel, Wizard, Princess, Christopher, Star, Liberty, Thomas, Ian, Captain Mike, Jeremy, Adam, and Leroy. And gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marco Stid, Vicente, Gilberto, Dead Lizard, Lounge Sam, Ross, Olympia Spuds, Jerome, Fatboy619, Scalini, Nick, Farty McButterpants, Blood Angel, Baroness, and the Fireworks Factory. Thank you all very much for your support. If this is your first time watching one of my videos, please note that I record all of these basically live in one take, and there are 17 adventures that we have to cover here, so apologize for any ramblings, for any for any recollections, because there's a lot of adventures that we have to cover, and I'm going to cover every single one of them and give you my final ranking, as well as that nice little tier list that you saw. And if you stick around to the very end, I'll also include what my favorite one-shots are, because some of them might actually be different from what I consider the overall best adventures. Now, I didn't have some kind of a chart or different checkboxes that I was looking at in terms of how to rank them. It was just which ones that I liked more than others. If you want my overall opinion on Candlekeep Mysteries as a campaign book, especially as how it pertains and looks in Roll20, which is what I'll be using for this video, you can see that video review as a separate video under Roll20 Review Candlekeep Mysteries. This video, I'm specifically going to be diving deeper into the actual adventures, but since there's 17 that we have to cover, it's going to be more of kind of a montage sequence of going through each one at a little bit of a quicker pace so that I can try and get this entire video done in ideally under an hour. We'll see what we end up with. So join me for ranking all 17 adventures in Candlekeep Mysteries, beginning at the bottom and going to the top because a little more exciting that way. I will mention right before we start, these are all good adventures. I don't think any of them were badly designed or were particularly disappointing. Maybe the bottom one or two I thought was like, that's not really my thing. But overall, very, very high quality adventures. And as I mentioned in my Roll20 review, I would absolutely recommend this campaign book, not to play it as a campaign because they don't have anything really to do with one another other than they technically all start or involve a book, but as a way to drop in well-designed mini modules, the kinds that you would find on the DM's Guild, for example, into your campaign. I think these are really great content, especially the Tier 3 adventures, and we'll obviously get to that, but there is not a lot of content in officially published 5e modules that actually cover those levels, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16, so that's even more impressive. Okay, so let's get started. Candlekeep Mysteries, ranking from 1 to 17, starting with number 17, what I think is the weakest of the modules is Mazfroth's Mighty Digressions. This is the level 2 adventure. This one has a interesting beginning where there's a bunch of books that are turning into monsters. I forget what the actual name is for it, some weird name. Where they're just transforming these weird ectoplasmic creatures, and you have to investigate why that's happening. And the investigation takes you to Baldur's Gate and to a bookstore, and the bookstore is run by a pack of jackal-wares, which seems interesting, but it doesn't really end up being interesting. The characters, they all have, dramatis personae, and they're all given different, personality traits and everything, but ultimately it just comes down to talking to them. Like, we're given the hideout as an actual not even really a dungeon crawl, just kind of where they're based out of, and unless you come in, just kick down the doors and start blasting away, which I guess any adventuring party could do, it basically comes down to you just talking to the pack leader and just saying, hey, what's up with this? And she's like, oh, I'm sorry, I never meant for these to appear in Candlekeep. And then you resolve the adventure and move on. There's not much payoff here. It's just not very interesting. So it starts off kind of interesting with the ectoplasmic monster book creatures, but then doesn't really go anywhere in terms of what we're doing in a bookseller's stall in Baldur's Gate. It just didn't really interest me at all. So that was number 17 is Mazfroth's Mighty Digressions. And I'll show you the map on a few of these, but otherwise I'm not going to skip around too much because the maps, unfortunately, as I mentioned in my Roll20 review, are not very good looking in Roll20. All right, number 16 is the Book of Cylinders. This one doesn't really do a good job of using the actual book, and that wasn't necessarily a criteria, but the book just kind of talks about this, what you think is a historical thing that happened, which is this race of frog folk being subjugated by UNT, and actually it's something that is yet to happen. It's kind of like a prophecy. I don't know anything about the Gripply. I don't know if this was an original creation for this module, or if this was taking maybe an older, there's so much D&D lore that I am not familiar with, so I'm not going to try to presume, but we already had the Grung as a frog folk, and this introduces different kind of frog folk that I guess aren't poisonous tree frogs. They're more nicer frogs than that, I guess, because I think the Grung are supposed to be pretty mean from Schult. And you are helping them against the UNT, and it's okay. There's a big kind of regional map you can use to explore. Ultimately, it comes down to basically a single encounter in this temple with a bunch of UNT, and it's just a classic, like, evil faction is subjugating another more primitive faction, and you just kind of have to rescue them. There's just not much involved there. Again, didn't quite really interest me, and you have to travel quite a ways to get there. I had to look it up on the map, but there's a peninsula near the Cloakwood north of Candlekeep, and you have to travel like for 100 miles to get to do this little event that basically boils down to this kind of single temple room. So again, the ones at the bottom aren't necessarily horrible adventures, just don't really interest me or excite me. That's number 16, the Book of Cylinders. And yes, I'll be spending a little bit more time on the ones that I enjoy for sure. Number 15 is the Lore of Lurure. This one is all about the Fae. I'm going to have to pick up my notes on this one. And this is one of the ones that, there's a couple of them that do this, where you open the book and it's a portal to another world. And a couple of these do these in better ways. This is, in my opinion, the weakest of those that transports you. At first, it seems like it's a moment in time, but it's actually to I believe it's to the Fae realm. And you go through a lot of Fae encounters. Some of them are social encounters, like for you talked to a bunch of satyrs. Another one is you're battling ettercaps, you're battling a hag, and rescuing some dryads. It definitely checks all the Fae boxes off, which there's not a whole lot of Fae content in this in among these adventures. This one has a final battle, which seems interesting. Let's actually jump to that map. Which one is that called? The Hag? No, it's not the Hag's Hovel. It's the Cult of Malar. Oh, there's so many maps. No, it's a Pool of Eternal Springs. This is, I feel like there's an error here, because this big boss is supposed to come out. It's this crazy-looking unicorn thing, this avatar of Malar, I believe. It's supposed to have, I think, legendary actions or layer actions, and it doesn't have those written in the stat block, so I feel like the boss fight doesn't particularly work that well here either, and even the werewolves that are summoning it, it turns against them. There's no real like story here involved in what's going on, why the Malar cult is here. So just for a Fae realm adventure, it's okay, and that's about it. Again, not a horrible adventure. It does a lot of cool Fae stuff. There's a good balance between social and combat. Not a lot of exploration because you're just kind of going from scene to scene. It's just shuffling along, but didn't quite excite me as much as a lot of Fae content usually does excite me, because usually it gets more involved with the story, and this one I feel like is pretty story light. That was Lore of Lurure. That's how you pronounce it. We've got number 14, Price of Beauty. This is another one that opens a portal, and this is, so far, the biggest dungeon crawl. This is the temple, which is a spa/bathhouse run by a bunch of hags. I like hags. They're kind of overused in a lot of D&D modules because they're so fun. They're the classic evil for evil's sake antagonists, and they're manipulative. They're very talkative villains. They just make good villains pretty much everywhere they're used, which means I end up seeing them a lot, which isn't necessarily the designer's fault here. This is a cool setup that uses the hags as like they're running a spa. At one point you can like do a workout with one of them. And there's people who are trapped in here. Oddly enough, the magic painting thing gets used quite a bit, where people get trapped in these magic paintings. That's used here, except it's like your youthfulness is kind of trapped in there. You can bargain with the hags and actually agree to have them paint your painting, and it gives you powers, but then eventually the curse comes to befall you. So for a mid-level dungeon crawl, I guess level 5 is mid-level, it's fine. There's a lot of fun role playing involved. There's good exploration. There's plenty of combat. Eventually, you have to make your way to the more hidden back areas that are guarded, including the Hag's Lair. There's I believe the person you're sent to rescue has been transformed into a Medusa, which is very thematically appropriate to evil that tends to try to corrupt people with their beauty and vanity. So I think it does all of that very well. I guess just the hag thing doesn't necessarily excite me that much, and I just think there are adventures that are just better designed than this one. But in terms of if you're looking for a mid-level one-shot dungeon crawl especially, which teases what I'm going to include in my final one-shot ranking at the end, this one works pretty well because it basically is completely self-contained within this dungeon. You're teleported here, and the entire story takes place within this fairly large-sized, you can see temple dungeon. So for that reason, it's got a lot going for it. All right, number 13 is Book of the Raven. This one has a really cool map. It's like a treasure map included in this book that you open, which is a neat idea, and it's a huge map in Roll20, and it's not used at all. It's super disappointing. So initially I had a very negative takeaway from this adventure because it just says, hey, look at the map and put in whatever encounters you want. Well, design those encounters, make it interesting, even if it's just like little scripted events that you're with a skill check or something. But nothing basically happens until you get to the end, which is this Chalet Brantifax, which there's a better... Oh wait, here it is. There's a better looking... There we go. So, and it really gives off this haunted, decrepit mansion theme, and it turns out it's a bunch of were-ravens who lair here, and they're not hostile, but they use all of their mimicry abilities to basically scare any would-be, adventurers, interlopers. So it starts out as a haunted house with a twist, and that's that the things that are scaring you and they're doing all this creepy stuff to you, they're not hostile until you get to the graveyard, and you learn this cool backstory about the Baron and the dead family and all this stuff that always is part of these haunted house things. And then you end up at the graveyard. You have to, I believe, dig up a child's grave and rest down in there, and then that teleports you to, I believe, the Shadowfell, and then you have this climactic fight, which I'm going to show you this map because it's really nuts. Because beforehand, we did all this exploration, and then you meet it's very exploration heavy, and then when you finally meet the were-ravens, it's probably social, and I'm thinking, there's no combat in this adventure. And then you get to the finale, and it's just all combat. You get to this Shadowfell room, and it's a boss battle with a wight. There's some gargoyles outside. There's a hordes of ghouls that come at you. There's warhorse skeletons. There's a crap ton going on here. So I think this one actually starts out weirdly weak because of that map that's not really used very well, but then it ends on a very strong note with I like the way the decrepit mansion is run as this kind of semi-low level, I think this is the level 3 adventure, kind of low-level haunted house with not a whole lot of actual danger, but then you get to the finale and it's just, whoa, crazy in terms of the combat value. And a good use of were-ravens, I think, too, which is pretty nice. This would be a very, very good Curse of Strahd module for sure, because it definitely nails that kind of gothic horror tone. Number 12, we have the Sarah of Yellowcrest Manor. This is an adventure that did not do what I thought it would do. I'm going to jump ahead to... let's go with the temple. So this one starts off as a diary, and you open it up, and it's like a ghost. It reminds me of Ghostbusters, I think, the opening scene, reading a book, where she comes in, and her tongue's been ripped out, and she's trying to communicate with the players, and there's this big, creepy story the players learn, where this lord came home, and all of his family was murdered, and then he had to move away. And where I thought it was going was going to create this haunted, like The Shining. I thought it was going to be this haunted mansion that you're going to go in, and it's going to be super creepy, and you're going to learn all this story. That's not at all what this adventure does. Instead, you end up going to the house, and there's just a person living there. It's like, oh yeah, I know the story. Let me tell you some more about what happened here. And essentially, you learn to suspect the Lord, who was, supposedly grieving and moved away, is actually behind all of this. And you learned out he is a cultist who murdered his family and now moved to the nearby village and is just recruiting and just still doing his cult stuff. And it turns into kind of more of a by-the-numbers, cult-based dungeon adventure where you go into the village, you kind of learn about what's going on, people are becoming seduced by this cult and joining up, and then eventually you end up in this temple dungeon. The cool thing about it, and the reason I kind of ranked it a little bit higher, even though I've been kind of talking negative about it, is I like the idea that the cult is, I forgot what the actual cultist, what they worship, I think it starts with a G, But they're like carving out people's brains and creating grells, which I really like it when adventures utilize monsters in cool ways. In this case, like, how are grells made? Or in this case, just these grells are made this way. Or they're just using the grell stat block as these like flying, brain tentacle creatures. So in other words, you see cool combinations of creatures that you never see before, which are humanoid cultists with monstrous grells, which I think is a neat dungeon. It's a neat little dungeon crawl. It's a pretty low level, I want to say, let's see, it's mid-level, level 7 dungeon crawl. So it's got a lot of exploration first as you're investigating what's happening, and then you end up at a fairly standard dungeon against a bunch of cultists. It's not bad. This is a very good example of the middle-of-the-road dungeon. It's just not what I thought this adventure was going to be, which was the really dark, horror-filled haunted mansion thing. It doesn't do that at all. It just kind of turns into it starts out, you think that's what it's going to be, and then I guess it weirdly subverts the trope, even though I kind of wish it embraced it and just went into kind of more of a standard dungeon crawl with, of course, the father who had murdered his family as the head cultist, and you have to just defeat him. So, but a nice little dungeon, I think. Number 11 is the Canopic Being. I hope that's how you pronounce this. This is not a bad adventure by any means. This is an example of one that other adventures just do what it's doing better, and we'll get to that when we get to the top end. This is a mummy adventure, and I really like, first of all, I mean, The Mummy, 1999 movie starring Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz is absolutely just top tier, excellent movie. So anything that involves old school, like mummies as the boss, is a really, really neat idea. This one you end up researching, I believe it has to do with Savras, who is the like divination god. This is about a mummy villain who has figured out a way to keep herself alive by transporting her organs into different beings. So it really plays up the mummy like origin story about the fact that, mummification involved removing the organs and placing them in those canopic jars and all that. And sure enough, the actual final dungeon involves finding all those jars. I believe it's this one, Balin's Tomb. And this is a weirdly designed dungeon because it's got some cool ideas in it. It's got these golems that the villain can see out of, and the villain can kind of harass the party as soon as they enter the dungeon because she's got all her organs placed in these golems, and they're kind of super powered, unique creatures, which is always neat to see. The actual dungeon design, just based in Roll20, here's what the golems look like. Is very weirdly old school in a bad way, where it's a lot. It's way too big for what this is. It's not a dungeon for giants, even though it's just humongous. And it's got all these long, winding hallways. It's just needlessly gigantic. So I'm not sure. This is another reason why I ranked it kind of low. And then it's a little bit empty for how big it is. I think the final encounter with the actual mummy lord is also a little underwhelming because she's basically alone, which is disappointing. She's got this awesome setup here, but it's kind of a trap. And she can reform. The one cool twist, which again, other adventures in this campaign book actually do a better job of this, is that she has placed her most vital organ, the heart, inside a friendly NPC who greets you at the entrance to this dungeon, who doesn't really know that she is harboring essentially the living phylactery of this mummy lord. So you have to go back and deal with her in some way, which is a very interesting twist. But there's even another high-level dungeon that does this exact same thing with a lich-type creature who has a living phylactery, which maybe is just coincidental. And even has an NPC at the beginning of the dungeon that you have to actually convince to end her own life because she is harboring as the like living Horcrux of this top-tier villain. So not a bad dungeon, not a bad adventure by any means, but compared to the other tier 3 adventures that are available, this is by far the weakest one, although I still really like mummies, and I would love a proper big mummy campaign. Would be absolutely fantastic. Number 10 is the Book of Inner Alchemy. This one I wish was more. I wish we had more of it. Where is it? This is the level 12 dungeon. This one reminds me a lot of like a almost like a kung fu movie, like a classic like 70s kung fu adventure. And it does a really great job exploring the villainous faction. A lot of times these dungeons, if they do an enemy, it's just the villain themselves. A lot of them do cool villains. This one actually does a full-on faction called the Order of the Immortal Lotus. Now, there is a villain who's in charge of that faction, and he also has sub-villains under him. I'm trying to find where this one is. It's really hard to remember. Temple of the Immortal Lotus. The hell is it? It's a level 12. Would put it... The barn door, Wisteria, Vale, the Manor. Where is it? There we go. Temple of the Immortal Lotus. Jeez. Doing it live. So, this would actually make a surprisingly good one-shot because it pretty much all takes place in their base in the forest. You're able to, it really skips past the investigation part. A lot of these adventures do the investigation thing. A lot of those ones I kind of ranked lower down. Like Canopic Being and, the Mazfroth's Mighty Digressions, Sarah of Yellowcrest Manor. You have to investigate all of those books and figure out what's going on before you make it to the final area. In this one, the pages are stolen from this book of mastery over one's body and self, and when the avowed, I guess, who are murdered are clutching a piece of cloth that have the symbol of this Order of the Immortal Lotus, and you immediately trace that to their base in the Cloakwood. So it would make a good one shot because it skips past all the investigation work you would have to do, and you basically just go right to this one area. But I like this area. It's really fun to play against a faction of evil monks. That's a really neat idea. And what really sold this for me is you've got a boss and you've got two sub-bosses, and they all battle you like freaking, superhero / kung fu movies. Or they all announce themselves. I'm Steel Crane. He just pops down, uses a slow fall ability, and he's got a bunch of monk minions with him and just fights the play. It's very combat heavy, but I think it nails that theme, and I just like the idea of an enemy faction of monks. This one would be especially good if you have a monk PC. And you can work this into their character arc or their backstory. Maybe this is their enemy faction, or maybe the player used to be part of the Order of the Immortal Lotus or something. But where you just want to introduce this as a cool enemy, monk faction to play as, would work really well as a drop-in into that campaign. It's designed for level 12, but obviously with a little, scaling work on the DM's part, you could make it for whatever level you want. But it would be particularly fun for that. And that's pretty much all it is. It's actually a very small dungeon. It just has a neat little design with him he's trying to craft these gloves of soul catching to make him like an even more immortal, awesome monk person. So, the motivations and all that is pretty hand-wavingly easy, but I just like the idea of battling through this, what amounts to basically a pretty straightforward dungeon crawl, but looks cool because it's just a bunch of buildings in this forest with just a bunch of monks ready to punch the shit out of anybody that's approaching them. So, kind of a fun idea, Book of Alchemy. But I do actually think this one could have been expanded into a longer adventure. The fact that you instantly get to basically just go to the Cloakwood instantly to their base is a little bit quick for me. Number 9, I believe we are just about cresting the halfway point here, is the Joy of Extradimensional Space. This is the level 1 adventure. And this does a wonderful job of presenting a very unique level 1 adventure. It's very hard to make level 1 adventures because level 1 PCs suck. There's not a whole lot of enemies you can use, although there are more Mordenkainen's and Valos got added. They did make sure to add some low-level monsters as well. But, typically you're fighting goblins in a cave, or you're fighting kobolds, or just the usual, low-level threats. This one does a good job of getting rid of all of that and say, hey, what if you explored basically a Mordenkainen's magnificent mansion, but it was occupied by a whole bunch of shit that's trying to kill you, essentially, or a bunch of homunculus chefs who are really hilarious and will talk to you. I just think that's a really fun idea. Ignore this, Abe. That was part of my Roll20 review process. Those animated brooms. There's a shelf full of books that's got chain that will just whip you with their chains. There's a mimic chair. Just a really fun idea for a small dungeon. Would obviously make a very good one-shot as well because completely self-contained here. You're just teleporting here to try to save this one wizard who got stuck in here. I just like the idea of a hostile Mordenkainen's magnificent mansion. It's a really fun idea, using a lot of creatures and situations you would not see in a level 1 dungeon. So the fact that it does so much different, unique things at level 1 earns a lot of points in my book. Number 8 is Shemshime's Bedtime Rhyme. This is the most unique adventure out of all of them, which does earn a lot of points for me. It's unlike a lot of adventures that you would deal with, which is, investigate something, go to a dungeon crawl, have a villain. This one does have a villain. This one is a horror story. It's like the Babadook or something to that effect. Everybody, in fact, it involves a quarantine. You're underneath. You're actually in water in Candlekeep, and you're inside this cellar looking at books. Somebody opens this cursed book, and it starts playing this children's rhyme. And it starts cursing everybody, and they keep having to sing and hum this song. And the more you do that, the more it summons this really creepy villain who is this entity that is tied to this book. And there's all these different events that transpire where people are getting agitated. Some people are trying to escape. Some people are going crazy. There's a bunch of NPCs. There's a whole dramatis personae that goes over, cellar inhabitants. Everybody's got awesome descriptions. Just a really fun idea for an adventure. I don't know how well it would work in a one-shot because it specifically takes place in Candlekeep, and you're all quarantined, stuck in here, and it's very horror-themed. So maybe with a little bit of changing, you could, or just have everybody like, hey, for one-shot, here's your characters, and you're playing in Candlekeep, and there's this curse that happens. But wow, what a really interesting idea. And then at the end, it summons this really creepy, messed up, ghostly villain who can only be destroyed in a certain way, like a good horror movie. It's only got a very specific weakness that has to be crushed by something. And sure enough, there's things in the dungeon where you can kind of manipulate that to where he gets crushed by something big. Like even the book doesn't, and hopefully he'll get cursed back into the book. It's a cool idea. You learn more about what's happening. Just a neat idea for an adventure to have what is essentially a straight up horror event happen that doesn't for once have to do with a haunted house or a backstory of murdered people. It's just a cursed book that infects everybody, and you are trapped and not let out because of a failsafe in Candlekeep that keeps everybody in there. Just a really, really cool idea. Very unique, very different. And I maybe I should have ranked it higher because of how well I'm talking about it. But I will say the other ones that are above it are excellent now. We're really getting to the cream of the crop here. And we're only halfway through, which shows you how good the overall quality is of these of this adventure book. Speaking of fantastic, number 7, Candlekeep Dekonstruction. Oh my god. If you wanted just a fucking hilarious idea for an adventure, we've got Candlekeep Dekonstruction. This one also takes place in Candlekeep. A thief falls down in front of you. You grab the book. You see that it's a bunch of diagrams for Candlekeep, including one of the towers that has weird mechanisms in there. You go into the tower, and essentially you realize that this tower has been modified and rigged to turn into a rocket ship. There's this the best fucking picture with this. I love that. And a group of custodians of Candlekeep who have grown disappointed with the way the books are being treated have formed a hilarious cult called the Livestock. This tower is called the Barn Door, and they all have messed up names like Donkey Biscuit and Chicken Beat and all this stuff. And then the leader has a really funny name and a hilarious attitude. It's a really the whole thing is just goofy as shit. It's fucking hilarious. This cult is just silly. The leader is silly. The concept is incredibly silly, but it works really well because it plays it up. And you explore the tower itself. You see people like strapped in, ready, because once that thief stole the book because he was having second thoughts, that starts this hour down countdown sequence. So the players are actually under the gun to try to figure out how to do this and stop. You get earthquakes happening. There's a lot of illusion magic trying to keep the players out. The villain is trying to find his ring that he dropped, which controls these really interesting monsters that I believe were created for Candlekeep Mysteries called Skitter Widgets, which are these crazy construct things that can actually breed and create little babies called Kitty Widgets, which is a really fucking crazy cool idea. So I love a lot about this adventure. It's really goofy. If you're not into like real just goofy adventures, then you can probably skip this one. But I thought tonally and everything, it worked very well for me personally. And it just seemed like a insanely clever idea. Like, what if one of the towers in Candlekeep was a fucking rocket ship that could blast, and there was a cult, a funny cult, not like this creepy doomsday cult, that just wanted to rocket off to the stars. They had no real plan beyond that. And the players actually have a chance to, pull the levers and decide, do they actually continue the launch? Do they delay the launch? Do they turn off the rocket ship? And the players could end up out in space. Like, it just kind of lets that happen. So what a freaking crazy idea. Very hilarious. Maybe hard to pull into a module. This one probably one of the better, like, just one-offs in general, unless you want to try to include having a rocket ship to the stars. But I just busted out laughing several times while reading this adventure, which is not something I believe I did for any of the other adventures. Extremely memorable Candlekeep Dekonstruction. All right, number 6. We've got Zikran's Zephyrean Tomb. This one just kind of works for me in a lot of ways. It starts off really cool. You get to a book, and it's got a genie attached to it. And the genie says he was serving a master who was, I believe, a water genasi, evil wizard, who bound him to the book and was really into like water and air and wanted to, give his own flying fortress out of cloud giant fortress and all these things. You learn a lot of information from the genie, and of course the genie come along for the ride, and he says, hey, as long as this wizard is still alive, I'm still bound to this book. So since I'm still bound to this book, that wizard's out there somewhere. We should go take care of him, and then if you do it, I will, grant you all a wish spell. And first you stop by his laboratory, which is this cool cliffside area that is, we can go to that dungeon actually, Zikran's laboratory, which is a brass dragon. And you can just converse with the brass dragon. So there's a little bit of combat here with some ghosts, but otherwise you can just talk to him, because brass dragons are not normally mean. They're the good ones. And you get information from him. You can bargain with him. You can trade with him. And then you actually go to the proper dungeon. Actually, that's the dragon, which is the Cloud Giant's Keep. I'm not going to show you this map because it's really huge, but it's got a neat idea because it's this ruined Cloud Giant fortress, but instead of being full of random monsters or the Cloud Giants themselves, it's full of Cloud Giant ghosts, which have very unique stat blocks. They're all indifferent to the player until they start, when there's a lot of loot. So until they start looting things or messing with things, then they'll start attacking the players. And they've got their own unique undead giant / stat blocks and things they can use. And then when you get to the actual boss area, of course, there's Zikran there. He's got elemental like guards with him, and he's got this giant cannon, which was just a part of this fortress that he's worked with, basically a remote control that you can just fire as a layer action at the players. And of course, they can target that. Just a really neat idea for a boss fight. A lot of this just works for me. None of it is particularly like amazing, but all the different pieces and components make a pretty cool mini adventure. I like the genie. I like the going to the laboratory, talking to the dragon. That's just enough investigation with some fun things happening, and then it leads to the Cloud Giant's Keep, which is a nice little dungeon crawl with the ghosts, and then the really cool boss fight at the end. And then the players can choose to, and they could even earn the genie himself as a like summonable thing from the book if they choose not to then return the book to Candlekeep. So I like just a lot about that adventure. Works for me very well. Zikran's Zephyrean Tome. Number 5 is Xanthoria. This is actually the top tier adventure, the level 16 adventure, and for that alone I give it a lot of points because there is not a lot of content, official 5e content, that goes above level like 12. I mean, we've got, I think, Out of the Abyss and the first dragon campaign makes it to maybe 14 or 15, and we've got, of course, Dungeon of the Mad Mage, which does go all the way to 20. Other than that, you're pretty much ending at like 11 or 12 for every official 5e published campaign. So all the tier 3 ones I paid very close attention to because we don't see a lot of that content. Xanthoria is basically just a dungeon crawl. It's a good dungeon crawl. I think it's very well done with a fun villain, and it's extremely thematic. Essentially, this druid got cursed by the madness of Zuggtmoy, which is the dungeon lord of like fungus and stuff, and she's turned into a lichen lich with a really cool picture. Reminds me of the villain from Ferngully, Hexus. Look how fucking cool that is. And the entire dungeon is filled with fungus things of all kinds. I mean, there's people being suspended by threads of fungus. There's like a fungus patch, like a bunch of poison ivy stuff, and it's got a single eyeball, and you run it as like a death tyrant stat block. It's there, and this one has the NPC ally at the beginning, a little pixie, and the villain has placed her phylactery inside of this pixie as a living phylactery. So this pixie is very, injured and can tell the party, the things they don't already know, and they of course can learn things more about the villain as they explore the dungeon. And eventually, by the end, you realize that this pixie has to die for the lich to permanently die, but she can't be killed. She can only choose to end her own life. So there's a really poignant final epilogue where once you've learned all this information, you finally defeat the end villain, then you have to convince her to like end her life, basically. It's just a really neat dungeon. It's too big on Roll20. I don't like the fact that it's a big 10-foot square grid that's been subdivided. But I mean, you've got beheres with like blood parasites. You've got a purple worm that acts as the trash receptacle because it's a level 16 dungeon. So how do you do a high level dungeon? This is a pretty good way of doing it. And oddly enough, it would make a good one-shot because it's just this dungeon. You get the information from the book. You get too much information from the book, frankly, that talks about this druid and talks about the fact that she's got this home base, wherever this is, like Kortha, and you end up in this fungal caves, and you just, the whole thing is this dungeon crawl. But it's a good dungeon. I think it's a really thematic dungeon. It works very well. It's got all the exploration, role-playing, combat in there. Just a really good combination. But there are some modules that do that better. Number 4 is a Curious Tale of Wisteria Vale. This one is another really, really cool idea for the ones that you open the book and it teleports you somewhere. I believe this is well, actually, some of the top ones do that too, but to where it teleports into a realm. This one is a virtual reality world. We can go to Wisteria Vale. Where is Wisteria Vale? Where are you? Okay, so this is a constructed world to protect what was like a Batman-like Harper figure who has this tragic backstory. His village was burned down by villains, and he ended up climbing through the ranks, becoming a high-level adventurer, but then he got corrupted at some point whenever he defeated a big villain and kind of absorbed some of that corruption, and then he started turning on everybody else and becoming kind of just a loose cannon wildcard anti-hero. That's probably too many adjectives. And the Harpers have essentially placed him in this world, this constructed like Matrix-like. I think there's a Fallout side quest like that where you go to like this area that's like reconstructed like 1950s Americana, to where it looks like his home village that was destroyed, and they keep him here so that they can try to figure out a way to cure him. Now they've got the cure, which is this dagger you can stab him with, because apparently it was a scar that he had. It's got a really cool backstory involved. And the players are teleported to this area, and it's got a bunch of, kind of creepy but interesting, like constructed commoners. Everybody's like an AI basically that's running this whole server. It's a really interesting fantasy version of doing that trope of the constructed world, which I haven't really seen done in D&D very often. Now, that's already a cool idea, but there's another twist on top of all that, and that is that a beholder this friendly chap has dreamed itself into this reality, as beholders do, and believes this is its world and its constructed reality. And so it's kind of taken over everything as the boss. It lives in the manor. It trapped the real, his name is Quill, the person that this whole place was created for, and trapped him in a magic painting. Magic painting is being used again. And has this kind of copy, as this doppelganger roaming around as Quill, and basically just runs everything. And it's not an initially hostile beholder, which is hilarious. And there's a little party involved here. So this one, I wish did things a little bit differently. Namely that I wish you were forced to roleplay a little bit more. And I wish that the end wasn't quite so easy. So there's a really fun bit where you explore the Manor, which is the dungeon attached to Wisteria Vale. And there you actually have to hop through all the magic paintings. And all the paintings have different monsters inside. One of them has like a giant rock. One of them has just like a feast you can eat the meals on, that do different effects. And the paintings all have different portals to each other. It's a really neat sequence. And essentially you can find Quill in there and then, convince him you're an ally. You can pop out of the painting and then you pop out in the middle of this party where the beholder's there and the doppelganger, and it seems like this really cool event, but all the players have to do is stab him with the dagger and then they immediately get transported out. I would modify this to where the players can't leave until they defeat the beholder, and thereby at least have a cool ending boss fight at the end to make it a little bit more satisfying. So as written, I have a little bit of problems with it, but it's such a cool idea. I love the concept of the constructed virtual world designed to keep this one figure who's got this whole cool backstory involved, and then it just happens to be there's a beholder that's also there who is just fucking everything up, and not even initially hostile, but obviously will become hostile once he sees the players have freed the Quill figure. So really cool idea for an adventure. Curious Tale of Wisteria Vale. All right, number 3 is a Deep and Creeping Darkness. This one, more than a lot of adventures, takes one creature, I believe it's from Mordenkainen's, but I can't remember, called the Meanlock, and uses that creature in very, very cool ways. This one is, let's see, I believe it's, go to Vermilion. So this is a story of a town that suffered a tragic mine collapse of a ore mine, platinum mine, whatever, and that kind of brought the town on hard times. And then because of this fear, Meanlocks were just manifested in the dungeon of the mine. And Meanlocks have the ability to basically infect and transform other people into Meanlocks. So this whole town, the few survivors, have been transformed into Meanlocks. So it's a very creepy exploration, and a lot of these adventures do this, where it's, like Book of the Raven, where the were-ravens are, creeping out the players. But this one I think is a cooler idea because the Meanlocks are actually interesting enemies that are enemies. And they hound the players throughout the, adventure here in the actual town. And then when they get to the mayor's house, it's another dungeon crawl where the players learn more information, and the Meanlocks can again jump the players and jack with them. And then it has a third map involving the actual platinum mine, where you finally go and take out the source of the Meanlocks. And the Meanlocks actually, because they were miners, they retain a portion of their mining abilities. They can actually set dynamite everywhere and start blowing up the mine as a kind of a final climax. This one does. I wish there was more of a boss battle, and maybe a little bit more of the ability to, converse with the Meanlocks or something. But I still think it does that. It checks that box of having that haunted house type feel with creepy creatures doing, weird shit that's designed to scare you. And then the creepy creatures are actually creepy. They're not just like were-ravens or something who just want to talk with you. These are actually like monstrous, nasty creatures. And I just love that this adventure goes whole hard with diving into how Meanlocks are formed, what they can do, what their lair looks like. Just a really, really signature cool use of this creature, which is probably not used very often because it was a lower level creature that was introduced, years later in, I believe it's either Valos or Mordenkainen. So I ranked it really high because I think it does all of that very, very well and has multiple little dungeon crawls involved. All right, we are getting to the top two. Now, this is very tricky because my top two adventures, honestly, I flip-flop constantly. I had one at the top at one point, then I had another one at the top. I mean, if I had a gun to my head, I would say one of them, but then I would have regrets about which one did I say. I think they're both really excellent dungeons. They're both tier 3 dungeons, really cool for two different ways. The cream of the crop. If I had to choose, for the purpose of this video, my number 1 and 2, then I would choose number 2 as the Scrivener's Tale. This one, when you read this book, you start getting cursed with the actual Scrivener's Mark, which is this huge progressive disease system where you get words of the book like written all over your body, and you get all these benefits and drawbacks, which is a cool idea. And essentially the drawbacks are worse because at some point you can't attune to magic items, you can't drink magic potions, you gain vulnerability damage even though you get some abilities. It's a Fae themed adventure, and you are telepathically connected to this cool boss, which is the Princess of Smoke and Shadow, I think? Princess of the Shadow Glass, who's a Fae princess who has broken away from the Queen of Air and Darkness and has been trapped inside this book because of her own machinations. And she is trying to break free of this curse, and only by defeating her, or according to her, only by defeating the Scrivener who wrote the book, can the players free themselves of the curse. So that adds a really cool, personable mission. You're not just rescuing somebody, you are specifically ridding yourself of this curse. And you end up going through this research that takes you... So you have to read about what's going on here. Contacted by Princess, need to follow investigation to Baldur's Gate. So you talk to the book owner's niece, you journey to his old office, and that finally leads to ruins near Daggerford, which turns into the final dungeon crawl. So this checks the box of you've got the inciting incident, you go through the investigation process, and then you travel over to the actual dungeon, which is this one, the Haven of the Red Quill. This dungeon has one really cool thing going for it, and that is when you make it to, you can explore the initial couple rooms. There's a neat little painting puzzle you can solve where you can summon a black dragon who just wants to escape. I would obviously include a lot more there. It's got a wave survival mode where you to open this door, you have to cast a damaging spell at it. And then when that happens, a bunch of mummies and a stone golem emerge from the walls, like magically, and you have to fight them. And then every time you defeat a stone golem, more mummies and another golem is summoned, and you have to kill 3 golems. They all have these keys on them. And then once you've defeated 3 of them, then you can unlock the door. That's a really cool video game-ass concept to get through a magic door, just by defeating waves of high-level enemies. Again, this is the level, the 14 adventure, so we can get away with that. And then the final scenario is a really cool boss fight against this Princess of Shattered Glass. And the whole time she's been talking to the players in their head, which is neat. You know, villains, you want to expand on that villain, you either have to introduce a lot of, you know, journals and backstories and other characters that can talk about them, or do what this does and just let the villain communicate with the players directly, which Canopic Being does that as well. But I think this is just a better version of Canopic Being, because I think the villain is more interesting, the scenario is more interesting, and the final boss fight is more interesting because you can summon all these Shattered Glass warriors and fight you. And it just ends up being a really cool high-level dungeon with a neat final encounter with this interesting... Oh, and the whole time you're being harried by the Queen of Air and Darkness's forces, because she also wants to get the princess back under her thumb, so she's trying to get control of the book. You meet the person who wrote the book, the Scrivener, who can actually tell you about all these things. All of that works very, very well. I'm trying to speed things up because we are already approaching 45 minutes. So my number 1 story, again, I went back and forth between Scrivener's Tale and this one, but I think what really sells me on this one is the location. This is kind of the Arabian Nights theme in terms of it is a desert. This is Alkazaar's Appendix. It combines like Arabian Nights with Iron Giant and a Draco Lich as a villain. So you read about this book, which involves a stone golem. There's a cool backstory of this blue dragon and this wizard. This wizard's got the... nether scroll tucked away, and it's his job to protect it. So he's been cursed by this dragon who attacks him, and as long as he lives, the dragon can't open the vault. And so the dragon, you know, he basically puts himself in like suspended animation in his vault and seals it up. The Draco Lich can't get in there, or the blue dragon can't get in there, so she ends up unlocking the ability to turn into a Draco Lich. So they're both just kind of at this deadlock state. But what they both don't know is that the golem that he created as a other way to open the door is still out there in the desert. And this book happens to teleport the players directly to the golem. Even though this does the thing of teleporting the players to the thing, there's still a lot of adventure left. So you teleport yourselves to the golem, which has a really fun personality where it's it can't communicate, but it's still got a lot of that robot, you know, Iron Giant type thing where you can be as communicative as you want. It can understand people. You know, you can say certain words and its eyes will light up. It can cry like sand tears, like just a really cool idea. Also, these Bedin NPCs can join you for the whole adventure, and they're just like really cool people that you can talk to, and they know the area and the region. It takes place in the Anarok Desert. There's a lot of fun encounters. There's some cyclopses. There's a giant dragon turtle, which has a bunch of chinguas that like go in and out of its cave area, which you can later have come, you know, rescue the players if they get into a bad shape with the Draco Lich fight. The actual necropolis is a neat idea. This whole area is just this, you know, city under ruins, and it doesn't quite do the full like Omu or Ithrin thing where it's this big long, you know, again, this is a mini adventure. Instead, it has a few like notable encounters. A lot of skeletal arms can you know, come out of the desert and drag people under. But eventually you make it to this central area that's surrounded by this magical windstorm. The golem, of course, can let you inside. And then you fight the actual Draco Lich battle, which is this, you know, big epic battle with a pretty strong enemy. And then you get to the finale. Well, this is actually, you have one fight with a bunch of giant scorpions and the storm giant skeleton. Then you get the Draco Lich fight. And then there's a really poignant ending where you can choose to either crack open the safe and just steal the nether scroll for yourself and the prince just withers and dies, or you can let the stone golem do his thing where this portal appears and he shoves his, you know, master into like Elysium and they go to heaven. And it's just, it's a really neat story. I love the desert theme. I love the stone golem as a friendly NPC. The players it's basically one long escort mission, but in the Anarok Desert with a whole bunch of cool desert things happening. Cool NPCs, really awesome high-level like boss fights and enemies, and a really fun ending. So for me, Alkazaar's Appendix, at least at the time of this video, is my number 1 adventure. So if you've stuck around this long, then here is my overall tier ranking, of which I would divide everybody up into. So basically 4 different tiers. None of these are particularly bad, which is why C is the lowest one. But for rank C, which I think are the weaker adventures, I would say were Mazfroth's Mighty Digressions, The Book of Cylinders, Lore of Lurure, and Price of Beauty. Above that, at rank B, which I would consider the pretty good adventures, are Book of the Raven, Sarah of Yellowcrest Manor, the Canopic Being, and the Book of Inner Alchemy. A, which is starting to be great adventures, would be the Joy of Extradimensional Space, Shemshime's Bedtime Rhyme, Candlekeep Dekonstruction, Zikran's Zephyrean Tome, and Xanthoria. And then S, which I consider are the best adventures in this module, the ones that I would absolutely recommend for everybody, would be A Curious Tale of Wisteria Vale, A Deep and Creeping Darkness, The Scrivener's Tale, and Alkazaar's Appendix. And as a final bonus, my top 5 one-shot adventures, the ones that I think could fit in the most easily, because they're like very self-contained, they don't involve a lot of, investigation or things that can eat up time. You can play this in a single, 3 or 4 hour session, would be the Joy of Extradimensional Space, Xanthoria, Price of Beauty, Shemshime's Bedtime Rhyme, and Book of Inner Alchemy. Those are the best ones that I consider to be the one-shot. Folks, that is going to do it. We did it under an hour. We ranked all 17 adventures from Candlekeep Mysteries in under an hour. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoy my videos, consider supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. Let me know what your favorite Candlekeep Mystery adventures are. If you agree or disagree with my thoughts in the comments below. Thank you.